Shalom, my name is Yehonatan Ben Devoy. This is going to be video 5 of why polygamy needs to be accepted in Torah-compliant communities. This video is going to focus on the Genesis 2 fallacy. The fallacy in and of itself is that Hashem basically gave set it up to where man and woman were only one group, were only one man, one woman, and that act was the intent for marriage or whatever. That in and of this whole ordeal, that the intent for marriage is, well, basically to have one wife in and of itself. The fact is, I don't believe that this is what we call a marriage, or much less the intent for marriage. What I believe this is the intent for humanity. The intent for humanity to have what is it called? At least to couple, essentially. To not be alone. And here, let me show you what I mean. Genesis 2:18 through 25. Let me read this to you. Hashem Elohim said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make for him a helpmate for him." And out of the ground, Hashem Elohim formed every beast from the field, from the fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was its name thereof. And Adam gave the names of all the cattle and the fowl in the air and every beast of the field, but there was not found a helpmate for him. And Hashem Elohim caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and took out one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which Hashem Elohim had taken from the man, he made woman, and brought her to the man. And Adam said, "This is bone of my bone, and flesh of my flesh. She will be called woman, because she was taken out of the man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And the two were naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." All right. Now, to illustrate what I'm talking about here, first off, this was not a marriage. All right? The reasoning by which I state that categorically is because the practices that were associated in the Tanakh for marriage are not here. So you're left with asking the question, what if this is a marriage, then how come this practice was not exactly practiced all throughout the Tanakh? In other words, you could say legitimately that there was no such thing as a wife all throughout the Tanakh, if you follow that logic. So, in and of itself, the fact is that, and here's the reasoning by which I state this. If you go to Genesis chapter 24, come on, you can scroll. Okay. I'm going to start at verse 50 and go to verse 52. Lavan and Bethuel said, "The thing proceedeth from Hashem, we cannot speak unto thee bad or good. Behold, Rivka is before thee. Take her and go, and let her be thy master's son's wife, as Hashem hath spoken. And it came to pass that Abraham's servant heard these words. He worshipped Hashem, and bowing himself to the earth. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go to verse 53. The servant brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold in raiment, and gave them to Rivkah, and also to her brother, and to her mother, precious things. All right. So the fact is, he gave a monetary exchange right there. And I'm going to call this a price, a bride price, considering of the overwhelming passages inside of the Tanakh. Another example is, what's his name? Jacob, when he served for Rachel and Leah 14 years to get them both for wages. They were specifically, how would I put it? His, the work that he put in, they were his wages. Anyways, the fact is that there was no monetary exchange in Genesis chapter 2. There was only Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and his bringing of the woman to him. There was no monetary exchange. There was nothing like that. So how come in those two examples there was a monetary exchange, yet in Genesis 2 there isn't? There's a disparity there. In fact, how come there was a negotiation? In fact, we can see right here in verse 49, the servant says, "Deal kindly with me, and truly with my master. Tell me if not, tell me, and that I may return to the right hand or to the left." In other words, he's wanting to know if he can bring Rivka to his master's son, essentially. It's very straightforward. He's wondering if he can bring her to his master. I mean, if you read it in context. So, just like there was a negotiation in Genesis chapter 29, where he negotiated with Laban by giving him a request for wages. And those wages were the girls. But there was no negotiation in Genesis 2. Nothing like that existed. So I hesitate to say that there was any sort of marriage in and of itself, or ceremony for marriage as it presents itself here in the Tanakh. So, by that determination, what Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh did was he set it up to where a man shouldn't be alone. Now, whether that is a Pelegesh, i.e. a concubine, or a wife, or heck, even a slave girl. Either one works. But it's not, the intent is not only specifically marriage, and it wasn't only one woman in that regard. I would say that it was incidental that they had only one woman. If you read Genesis chapter 7 through 8, Hashem set it up to where each animal had a corresponding mate, but only one. Each animal, though, had a, what was it called? Some of those animals were actually, quote unquote, how would I put it? Were actually, quote unquote, polygamous by nature. Lions were as well, but the lion in Noah's account only had one female. The other ones died. So, in and of itself, to say that it was just that this was the supposed intent, where does it say that? In fact, the intent, I hesitate to say that there was any intent. In fact, in Genesis chapter 2, there was no command in and of itself. It just says that the intent is for a man to cleave to a woman. Period. So ultimately, when it comes to a Genesis 2, it's all one big fallacy that they were, quote unquote, that there was one marriage. So I sure hope that this study blesses you. And thank you.